Welcome to the Mandatory Social Interaction Show. I'm your host, Eric, along with the thundering Ben Burns. Ben, how are you this week?
Only after taco night. I'm doing all right.
Oh,
How are you?
I am well. We've got a few people in the chat, so why don't we say hi to Toxic, Sophira, Poetic Android, Toxic, again, because I said you already, Hambrams. And I think we had Swagman in here a minute ago, so awesome to have you guys here after the most recent Taco Tuesday debacle. Ben is apparently recovering well, so I think we're okay.
Swagman sounds like he'd be from the DC universe.
He might be. So
like Marvel takes their stuff a little too seriously.
Yeah,
Swagman, yeah.
Swagman is DC's answer to, like, you know, Marvel's Squirrel Girl. It's Swagman.
Something like that.
Swagman can defeat all the superheroes.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's okay.
Get off track right away, so we don't have to worry about anything.
So what's going on with you this week, Ben? Anything good?
It's been busy, but it's been all right. Yesterday, actually, I've been working on doing some co-streams with my wife, which have been a lot of fun.
Nice.
Where she plays video games and I end up doing creative stuff, or we work together on playing a game or something. But it's been a lot of fun doing that. Otherwise, it's been just work.
Sweet.
Work. Nothing wrong with that. Just
that's
work.
cool though. The chill stream thing. That's really awesome.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
And there's something actually that I'm looking to start tomorrow, so maybe we'll talk about that too.
Yeah.
Our first story here was suggested by.
I didn't get to ask how your week was.
Oh, my week was actually pretty good. I had a week of vacation, spent it with some family time. It was pretty good. So
I'm glad.
Yeah, it was all right. So our first story here was actually suggested by Toxic, and so this is maybe something we can touch on. Toxic was writing a baseline, and basically everybody just asked, how do we not sound like Toxic? So my suggestion was writing a good baseline, and then you wouldn't sound like Toxic, but
Womp womp.
Sorry, Toxic. Toxic actually had no suggestion. I'm just messing with Toxic.
Oh, I was gonna say, it's like finding a way to not copy other people and still sound original is actually pretty difficult to do. I watched a video this morning because I had mentioned it on the stream last night. The last video that Every Frame of Painting has posted is talking about the Marvel Symphonic Universe, where they're talking about the music inside of the Marvel movies and why it's so bland and boring and non-recognizable. And I think one of the major points that he touches on inside that video is talking about temp music and how people are inspired, or filmmakers are inspired by the music that they put in there temporarily while they're building the film, just so they have something in there to help push the mood along. And then when they hire a composer to actually make that music, they're just like, yeah, just make it like this. And
right.
And how that can kind of homogenize the whole industry, because everybody's just starting to kind of copy everybody else, because that's what the filmmakers want. And I think that it's a very interesting topic to explore, because when I worked on the music for Stadtgeist, the little video that you made, we did the same thing. But I feel that I took a lot of, or you were flexible when it came to personal expression in those in those things, where it's like, make something that has this mood. And I think that there's a very strong differentiation there, where it's like, you want something that has the same like emotional quality. You don't want it to sound exactly like this. And I think that's really interesting. And
something that I would consider doing the next time is, what I'm almost thinking, if I was going to do that again, is I would give you the video with no temp track, because last time, just nobody else knows. So last time when we worked together, I gave Ben the raw video, and I also gave him a video with the temp track in it. And this, if I was going to do it again, I would give you just the raw video, just the edit. I would edit to the temp music, and then I would hand you the edit, just with no music or anything. And then what I would probably do is hand you a playlist and say, these are the moods I'm going for, and not show you necessarily where they were edited in. Or if maybe that playlist could even include songs that weren't in the temp edit. And just to say, hey, these are moods I was going for, without saying like, oh, this is edited really tightly to this thing. Because one thing that I felt like was like, you did a great job on the soundtrack, but I was like, I kind of felt like I tied your hands a little too much with the temp track. And I'm sure, and don't get me wrong, like everything came out great. I'm not, but like the next time I was like, I think it would be cooler if I just said, here's the moods, and maybe even said like this is kind of this, maybe this is in this mood, this is kind of in that mood, and then you can kind of pick and choose, from some temp music, like kind of the way they do cinematography, where a director and a cinematographer will often sit down and like watch a movie that's unrelated and say like, this is what I'm looking for, or watch some key scenes and go like, hey, I really liked what they did in this scene in John Wick 2 because of the lighting and this and that and the other thing, and like having that dialogue where it's like, this is what I want you to keep in the back of your mind, but like totally here's the blank slate. I really like that idea.
Yeah. I'd be willing to try that. I feel that it's not necessarily what we did last time was wrong. It's mostly that other filmmakers or other people that use temp tracks get married to those
the temp
ideas.
Track,
Yeah, and they're not flexible. So I don't think that it's an issue with what we did. I think it's more of an issue with how other people perceive that. Yeah. And because like the way that we did it worked fine, and I'm interested in the way that like the way that you proposed. I think that would be a lot of fun too. It would definitely result in a different idea. But the fact that, and this has happened as I've done commissioned work as well, where people are just like, just make it like this. And it's like, that's not why you're hiring me. I mean, right. If you wanted to make it just like that, go hire the person that made that song originally. And granted, probably part of the reason why they wanted to hire me is because I'm cheaper than the other person. But it's just the idea where it's like, you have to have this creative expression inside of this stuff, or you're just going to end up homogenizing the industry and just recycling ideas over and over and over. And I think that it's really important to allow that kind of flexibility, whether or not it's like make a song that has this feeling, or just here's the video and here's a lot of songs that inspired this video. Yeah. Like both of those I think are different methodologies, and I think they'd both work really well. But it's just being like, make something that's exactly like this, because I don't have the creative drive to, direct you in a different way. I think that that's really the wrong way of going about it.
Yeah. And just to clarify, it's not that I felt like we did anything wrong. And I feel like, I feel like what we came up with was really good, and I really liked it. Yeah. But what I'm thinking of is going forward is I like the idea of it being a little bit more free and open to interpretation, by giving you some general guidelines and then just saying, go for it. And, even like go for it, and I will re-edit if you, come up with something, I'll move things around a little bit so things match up more to the music if you come up with something that's not quite exactly to the edit.
Which is also a reason why people probably don't do that system very often, because it's a lot more work for the person giving the work. Yeah. And why would you want to do that? That's why you pay somebody else.
And and that depends. I mean, like, I'm sure there's some give and take there, right? Because it's certainly possible to come up with the edit for the scene that's like really perfect, and then end up, like the music has to match the edit. Or and like I'm talking about, like maybe you come up with music that's really perfect and making the edit match the music. In our case, my edit was not like, it wasn't like traditional scenes. So it didn't matter. I could have really, I shouldn't say easily, but I could have re-edited scenes to match things more because things were kind of abstract.
Yeah. I mean, what you're talking about is turning it into a collaboration rather than just hiring somebody.
Yeah, totally.
Which, oh my God, why would you want to do that?
Well, that's kind of the point, right?
Yeah, it is. It's very much the point, I feel.
And so speaking of like music and collaboration and copying people's work and homogenizing and all those things, something that was on the Trello board today and I would like to talk about, and I think you might be the good person to talk to, is Neil Cicerega's music.
Oh, yeah,
mashups.
we were going to talk about that.
And the idea that, so there's a comedy element there, kind of an ironic, thing to some of that. And also there's a, certainly a musical element in terms of arrangement and, and curation of what you put into a mashup. But there is some debate and some backlash about, are mashups music? And I would argue in a lot of ways that, if mashups are not music, then half of Fatboy Slim's catalog is also not music. Given that essentially, like, if you go and go to whosampled.com and look up, say, Praise You, and when you find all the samples, literally the entire song is samples of other songs.
Yeah, pretty much any giant from the 90s, like the Crystal Method, Prodigy. I had like two other ones. I can't remember, but like everybody resampled. Basically any large DJ Shadow, thank you. That was another one I actually had. But anybody who made music in the 90s especially was all resampled. And that's like fine. I think that resampling is totally like something that is musically sound, because resampling is just a more technologically advanced way of taking somebody's chord progression or being inspired by somebody's melody or whatever. It's just like there's so much inspiration out there. You just have to find it.
Yeah.
And like when you go into the idea of mashups, I think that's it's a little bit more of a gray area, but I still feel that it's very strongly based upon inspiration. And now there are mashups out there that just take the acapella of a song and put a janky beat under it. And it's like, oh, I mashed up, whatever. And it's like, no, that doesn't require creativity. That's just copying and pasting. But what Neil Cicierega does and the like is he takes these ideas and he recontextualizes them in a very interesting and often humorous way, where like one of my favorite, I call them jokes because that's basically what they are. They're setting up a punch. They're doing a setup and a punchline. You play the Friends theme. It's like da 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 da, and then you have the claps. But instead of the claps, it's like the intro to Down with the Sickness with the wah! It's just like it's the perfect setup, because you're expecting the four claps and you get like the super like grungy, like guttural sounds of, and it's just like, it made me laugh harder than pretty much any joke I had heard for a very long time, because it's just this setup and payoff. And
I'll tell you,
think that, yeah, go ahead.
DJ Earworm. I don't know if you're familiar with Earworm.
I'm not.
So that was another mashup artist, I think kind of before Neil Cicierega. He did a mashup of, oh God, I'm trying to remember the name of the song, but it's a Scissor Sisters song.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's like Scissor Sisters mashed up with, the Beatles mashed up with, oh God, what's his name? George. Oh, he died. The pop artist. George from Wham. George. Come on, guys, help me out. I can't think of his name
I'm
now.
so bad with names.
George Michaels? George Michael. That's it.
Michael, yeah.
Yeah, George Michael. Thank you. Yeah.
I should have known that.
I don't know why that didn't, like, I'm getting old. So anyway, like, this mashup is like one of my favorite songs ever because it actually like, it like ends up by combining these three things, like telling a story that none of the songs told before.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, it essentially ends up telling a story about somebody who leaves home and like finds a community and like they go out all night and party. And like, it's like, oh wow, none of these songs told that story before, but when you put this all together, it's so perfect, and all of a sudden it recontextualizes the whole thing.
Yeah.
And I think Neil Cicierega does that to comedic effect.
Yeah. Exactly.
I mean, like, I love his Walk the Dinosaur, which is also matched up to the Beatles, which is hilarious. Just because it's like slowed down and like all of it, it's like so like it's so weird and great. I love it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I also really like his work because it shows how malleable music as a concept actually is, where a lot of songs use the same scales even if they're in different like root notes, but they use the same scales, so if you do a little pitch bending, things can fit together very well.
Yeah.
And you often get very surprising results. And I love the idea that you can manipulate music in such a way, and you can do this in other forms of art, but probably not as easily. And I think that it's just so cool that like the music as a concept can be manipulated that way.
Yeah, well, and I think it's funny too. One of the interesting things to me about doing a mashup is taking a major and making it minor, or going the other way, because it only requires. Sometimes it doesn't even require bending the melody at all. Because the melody can be like 1, 4, and 5, which don't change. Plus most everybody, if they're using the 7th, are using the minor 7th anyway. So like you only ever have to change it if they, and I know this is getting very music theory technical, but like you only have to change like very little bits of things. And all of a sudden, the whole song is like recontextualized in this way that, like, something that was really like upbeat and happy is now like, sad and menacing. And it's like, that's super cool that you can do that, and combine it with this other thing.
Yeah, and even something simpler than that, Madeon did a remix of Deadmau5's Raise Your Weapon. And for the acapella, for the vocal part, all he did was change like the resolution of one note from minor to major. Yeah. And it like changed the entire song. And obviously he did a lot of other work like with the EDM and just like making it his own, but just like you're expecting one thing, you're expecting it to like resolve to a minor chord, and it actually resolves to this major chord, and it just changes the feeling of the entire song. And I think that even very subtle stuff like that in music can be incredibly powerful.
Yeah, totally. And that's what I mean. Like, I feel like, I think a couple people like Toxic said in the chat that mashups are music. And I am definitely in the mashups are music camp. I think if you start throwing out mashups, you have to throw out so much other music that people would argue is music. Come on.
As long as the mashup actually has creativity involved with it. I've heard so many terrible remixes and mashups where it's just literally taking two things and squishing it together, and it's just like, no, that's not a mashup. That doesn't require creative energy or thought. That's just mashing two things together.
Yeah.
Which
and I mean, I guess
same word.
I guess there's always a taste line, right? There's always There's always the like, is it a mashup if you do this, or is it a mashup if you like, where does the creativity start and end? Where's the intent? I mean, those are creative questions,
that's personal preference
that you basically have about all arts. And I don't mean you specifically. I just mean in general. Those are things that, like, someone paints a canvas black and puts it up and sells it for, $1 million, and everyone's like, I could have done that, and it's like, yeah, you didn't, but you could have.
Well, even if you did, I mean that goes to the rant that I had on my stream, I guess. Even if you did do that, you didn't have the connections to sell it in the same way that the person who did do it has. And I went on quite a long rant about having personal connections and why your art is important. It's not, if you're trying to grow your community as an artist, and this is a completely different topic, I don't want to get too far off, but if you want to grow as an artist, you have to make connections. You have to know people. And if you know people, then you have the opportunity to sell a black canvas for $100,000 or whatever.
Right.
And if you don't know anybody, it doesn't matter how good your art is, you're never going to sell it because nobody's going to know you exist. And if nobody knows you exist, how are they going to buy it? So that's a completely different topic, but
you're not wrong. I mean, that's the thing. But again, that comes, that kind of, a lot of that stuff though boils down to, like, is our mashups music is basically a reformulation of the, but is it art, right?
Mm-hmm.
That
question.
Oh, no, of course it doesn't. But that's what I mean. So, our mashups music is kind of the same question.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
It a lot of that you can say, well, it's in the eye of the beholder, or, there's many arguments on both sides about what is and isn't art, or what is and isn't music. But, it kind of boils down to, I guess there isn't really a definitive answer, but I think everyone here on the podcast is saying that mashups are music. I'd like to get Tim's perspective on that, but Tim couldn't make it today.
Yeah, well, hopefully he'll be able to listen to this and chime in. I'd like to hear his thoughts too. I mean, it's the same thing. It's just like, oh, is John Cage's 433 music or art or anything? It's just silence. I don't know. It's like, whatever. Just if you enjoy it, if you get value out of it, then it's art. I mean, that's my definition of it. If you get emotional or like some kind of value out of experiencing it, then it's art. Like, whether that's complete silence or noise music or, a black painting or anything, it's just like, if you get value out of it, then, if it enriches your life in some way, either emotionally or intellectually, then yeah, it's art.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing is, I mean, certainly, I feel like, if you start getting into, like, there you go, Black MIDI is Black MIDI art, and sure,
I think that can be very artful,
and that's
in ways that aren't necessarily musical, but they can be very artful.
Yeah, and then it's like, well, is it art or is it music? And then you can start to dive down this rabbit hole. It's kind of I don't want to say it's a slippery slope exactly, but it's kind of, once you start posing that question, you start to have to either really make very definitive definitions about things, and then who can agree on a definition about art? It's kind of like, is Pluto a planet? Well, they had to basically construct a bunch of definitions about what a planet actually is, and figure out that Pluto does not actually meet those criteria. Like, I mean, that's essentially what happened, because before that happened, there were no definitions of what was and wasn't a planet. And it kind of came down to the point where people were looking at Pluto and people were looking at some of the larger asteroids in the asteroid belt and saying, Pluto's not a whole lot bigger than that. And if we are including Pluto as a planet and Charon is a moon, then these other things also are planets and moons, and now we have a whole lot more than 9 planets. And and it's like, okay, wait a minute, let's see what's logical and what's not, and they came up with definitions there. And music and art are not that scientific.
No,
so
no, it's
so I mean, I can say, well, the definition of art is that you've made a statement, the act of doing it makes it art, and whatever. right? And it's your personal statement, and you could say, well, no, art means that you've taken, paint and canvas and blah blah. Like, I could say art is the act of doing it. You could say art is the thing itself. And then it's again, it's hard. These things are hard to define, but it's fun to talk about.
Yeah. Until you get somebody who doesn't want to have an open mind about it at all, and then it's just frustrating.
Well,
but
it boils
thankfully
down,
nobody like that is here.
and it boils down to a it boils down to if you have to walk into a conversation like that knowing that there's no answer.
Yeah,
Exactly. If you're going to talk about these things, you can state your opinion, but you cannot say one way or another definitively that there's a good answer to what is art, or is our mashups music, or
Android asked for the Wikipedia definition of art, and I'll read that because it is interesting. It's a very interesting way of describing it. But it's also very, very broad. So art is a diverse range of human activities in creating visual, auditory, or performing artifacts or artworks, expressing the author's imaginative, conceptual idea, or technical skill, intended to be appreciated for their beauty or emotional power. Now, it goes on, but it goes on for probably a while. But I think that that's technically correct, but I like just distilling it down into what I said before, where art is just something that you experience, and that not necessarily experience in a positive way. Like, I can listen to noise music and not like it.
Yeah.
And I like some noise music, but I can not like it, but I still can understand that somebody took the time to craft that in a creative way. And I think that that's still considered art.
Yeah. And here's another interesting question. And something that I'm into, or have been looking into, getting into, is like generative art.
Mm-hmm.
This is essentially, some aspect of programming, and in some ways, sometimes it's even programming where you're just kind of fumbling around until you do something interesting.
Yeah.
Finding an algorithm that. Go for it, Ben.
Sorry. No, I was keep talking. I have a cool book down here that I need to find. I'm going to show it on stream. So just keep talking. Finish your idea.
Yeah. Essentially, one of the most interesting ones that I've seen is this guy who came up with an algorithm that would cut. It would create these amazing kind of 3D shapes, and they're all mathematically generated. But then what he did was he fed those shapes into a laser cutter that would cut paper, and that paper was then stacked up so these 3D shapes became columns, and then he displayed those in a museum, not a museum, like an art gallery, sorry. As a walk around exhibit where there were these amazing, super intricate mathematic. I do actually have a link to that pizza. If you give me a couple of minutes here, I can get it for you. It's like this amazing mathematic, they're really, really cool looking. And the question kind of becomes, all he actually did was program the thing and then assemble some paper. Is that art? I think it's art. I thought it was super
definitely
cool. But I could get where someone could say that may not meet the definition of art as far as
Wikipedia is concerned.
Wikipedia, or and maybe that's not. Yeah, exactly. Poetic Android, you're not wrong, right? It's it's very easy to be dismissive of some of these things because it kind of becomes is art the process? Is art the final product? And these things can become very, very murky because it's really hard. I mean, there is no good definition of art. Even the Wikipedia definition probably leaves some things out that other people would consider to be art.
Yep. Okay, so And I've talked about that before too, where I feel that art is the product, not the process, but that's something different. So I don't even know what this book's name is. It's called Written Images on it. It's hard to see, but it's called like Written Images. But basically everything in here is generated off of a seed. Let me try to find some good ones. So like this is a bunch of traffic cams, and let's see, these are like a pointillism dot kind of thing based off of a seed. The unique thing about this book is that every time this book was printed, those seeds were regenerated. So this book is wholly unique. This is the only book that has the pages printed in this order with these images.
Hey, Ben, can
yeah.
you hold it like in front of your face? Because, yeah, there you go.
Yeah, sorry.
Awesome.
Yeah, so these images are all based off of random seeds. Oh, thank you, Pizza. This was a Kickstarter a long time ago. I don't know if it's still working, but some of them have the program in them, but all of them have the seed values
neat
that they used inside of each page. So each of those seeds are randomly generated, and like you get some incredibly cool art based off of it. So this is all programmatically generated, and essentially, I don't know if these books are still in print. I should look at the site, but if these books are still in print, when you order one, you're printing one, and it's based off, yeah, every book is unique. Every book is different. And some of these actually have the algorithm code in there. Like this is, I believe this is like Twitter hashtags that are trending while the book is being printed.
Really cool.
Yeah, it's really fun to look through. And it's like, this might be like considered noise music a little bit, but this is like noise that's generated from some kind of algorithm. And it's just, I haven't looked at this book in probably 5 years. And I know some of them have the actual program, like the code in it, but
yeah. And
even something simple like this is when these pages were printed, or something similar, except that it's all printed out in like jelly beans.
And the question, and then you can, I mean, I could easily see someone saying, is that artwork?
Yeah.
Like, and
how rad is this though? Like, how cool is that?
Here's the question for you, Ben. If these are all unique, and the art is the product, and they're not replicatable exactly, is that art? And again, unanswerable questions. I realize that, but it's an interesting thing to think about. These are things that kind of push the boundaries and push the definition of art. And like Hambrams is talking about, he used to do like fractal flames, and again, super cool, pushing these algorithms to make really, really intricate and interesting, cool patterns. Pizza, I really like that. I really like that. If it's not art, it's a high effort shit post. I love it. That's fantastic. I mean, like, and I feel like I need to hang that up somewhere.
Yeah, I kind of want to steal that pizza and put it on a button. I might, with your permission, I might take that. I'm going to write it down. But I think that's kind of how I feel that art is the result and not necessarily the process. I think that the process can be artistic.
Yeah.
And that book definitely is artistic with the process. And I feel that the result is art because, there are artistic works that are singular, that are unique. And I think that's sculptures specifically are incredibly singular, especially from like the Renaissance period. But like having something unique doesn't make it not art.
And what about the opposite? What about I make a sculpture and then I take a mold of it and I start molding, I start making copies. Are the copies also art?
Well, I mean, how do you think like CDs are made?
True. But although the CD, you could easily argue though that the CD is not the art. Like there's art contained on the CD. It's not the same thing as copying a sculpture.
Yeah.
Like the sculpture itself would be the handmade piece, and the replica that's done as a mold, maybe that's made by a company. Maybe I've said, hey, you can take this mold and mold versions of this and sell it. Does that stop being art?
No. Why would it? Whoa! I almost spilled.
I don't know. I'm just asking because it's kind of at the fringe.
Yeah. Well, having something be unique is not like the value of an artistic piece, unless maybe that black canvas painting is the unique property of that art. But I doubt it. I think that the effort and the thought and the care involved in making stuff or making the thing is what makes it art. Not necessarily the output. And now I'm mixing up my own things where I'm saying the output is the art, but I don't know. It's hard to say. And like the whole process is like, I'm gathering my thoughts. Just a second.
It's all good. That's the thing. So here's the thing for everybody watching, and I think everybody gets this, but these aren't answerable questions. And if you're having arguments about these things with people, you need to realize that either you or they or both of you need to like take a step back and breathe sometimes, because you'll never get to the bottom of these. And it's really easy to do what Ben did, which is end up on both sides. And that's not a fault of Ben's at all, because again, these things are hard to define and hard to understand. It's like, and exactly, Android. Art is about conveying ideas. Art is about putting your feelings down and having somebody, react to that. And art is a lot of things, and so it's really hard to say, is art the process? Is art the, is art the final result? Is, like sometimes it's one and sometimes it's the other, right? Like that's the thing. It's a really amorphous thing. So maybe my vamping there gave Ben a little bit of time to figure out what he wanted to say.
I think my main thing is I was conflating two ideas, like the concept of art and the purpose of an artist. And I think that the process of making something can be considered artful, but as an artist, I feel like the process shouldn't be your art.
Yeah.
The process should be your process. The process is something that you generate joy or feelings or emotions or something from. And the result, the product, is your art. Like, and I've said that before, where art is the byproduct of being an artist. Not necessarily because it's like something that you do to make art. You are an artist primarily because you want to express yourself in a way that your words simply aren't able to do. And I know definitely with music, I'm able to express myself in ways that I can't do with words. And that becomes the art. And like the process is artistic, but it's not art. I think that's where I was kind of mixing up my ideas, where it's just like I was defining art in two different ways in two different contexts. And I think that that's how I got confused and kind of cornered myself a little bit.
Well, that's okay, and that's okay though.
Yeah,
I mean, that's
totally
that's
fine.
like not, no one's like sitting here like
judging silently.
you or jumping on you. Although I do have a question now, and this occurred to me. What about actors on a stage? Is that the product or the process? Because it's kind
the
of
film is the process.
It's kind
or
of
the product.
Well, no. I'm not talking about film, but like maybe a play, right?
Okay.
Like
Gotcha.
so actors are on a stage performing. That's kind of the process and the product.
Yeah. I mean, live streaming is a little bit the same way.
Yeah.
Like if you do a let's play on stream, it's the same thing where, the product is the same thing as the process of making it because it's happening simultaneously.
And Android is asking if art is the product, what is artwork? But I think you're just kind of playing semantic games, because you could easily say artwork is the product of the artist. And I think that I think art and artwork in that sense are the same thing.
Yeah, I agree with that. I feel like it's the same idea, just in a different context, in a different viewpoint. Artwork might be art generated by a certain person.
Um, you know,
Yeah.
so, and here's this kind of dovetails into something that Hambrams wanted to talk about, which is like a judgment in art. Like, maybe it's self-judgment, or maybe it's external judgment of, self-judgment. Is this good enough? Is this as good as so and so? That's
the definition of a slippery slope right there.
Oh, sure it is, and we're gonna go barreling down it, and that'll be fine. But the question kind of becomes, where does judgment fit in? Because for one thing, if judgment's not part of art, what are art critics, right? And not just art,
get paid
and not
too much to, yeah.
Well, yes and no, right?
That's a whole different topic.
But when I say art critics, I don't mean specifically snooty people who walk around museums. Think about music criticism, film criticism, literary criticism. Art criticism is a much bigger subject than we tend to give it credit for. Even video game criticism, something we're all familiar with, right? That could be considered. If you think video games are art, then that's a form of art criticism.
I still think that it's a useless is too strong of a word, but I feel like having somebody else decide for me how I should feel when I experience something is not something that I care about, but at all.
At the same time, and I'm going to come out on the other side of that. I will say that a good movie reviewer is not telling me how to feel about something. A good movie reviewer is giving me an idea of whether or not that particular piece of art is something I'm going to enjoy or not. And I'll give you an example. I read this back when Roger Ebert was alive. He wrote a review of the first Resident Evil movie with Mila Jovovich, and he did not like the movie very much, and he gave it like 1 or 2 stars. But based on his review and what he wrote, I went and saw it because I was like, oh my God, I'm going to love this. And it's because his review was so good at saying, hey, this is what this movie is, and it's not my thing. And it might be, and it kind of left open because Roger Ebert felt like criticism should be a conversation. He kind of he didn't pass, a huge amount of judgment. Sometimes there were movies that he did really judge harshly, but there was a lot of times when he would say this was okay for what it was, or this is what it was, and that's not my thing. That would give you a really good idea of what to expect when you walked in. And I loved Resident Evil because it was so horrible. It was essentially a B movie, and that was what was great about it. And that's basically what his review said. And I was
as somebody who likes watching bad movies on Netflix, I can appreciate that.
Yeah, and that was the thing. So here's a review from a critic that literally was not a positive review, yet influenced me to go see the thing.
Okay, I'm going to recontextualize that for you. What you enjoyed about that, you enjoyed Ebert as a reviewer, and what he was doing is he was mashing up his style with that movie. He was taking his thoughts on that movie and mashing it up in his style. And this is kind of calling back to what we were talking about before. You got value out of that. And I've definitely listened to songs that Cicierega put in his mashups that I had never heard before. Like, unfortunately, I had never heard Walk the Dinosaur before. And that doesn't, a reviewer didn't really tell you that the movie was good or bad. He basically was mashing it up with his writing style. And he was creating something new. And I'm not trying to be like, oh, well, this review is art or anything like that. I was just trying to say that he's recontextualizing this in a way that he was creating something for you that you enjoyed and that you went and sought out the source material from. And I think that is valuable as a artistic process, because if you get a good reviewer like that, then it is his reviews are entertainment in a different way. They could be considered artful, I guess, but they're entertainment. And if you go and seek out that, if you get value from that entertainment, then yeah, like you can go there. But I guess yes, there is value in that. You are correct. And I see just a lot of games reviewers and other people who are just churning through content and not necessarily reviewing it in an artful or a mindful way. They're just being like 7 out of 10, it's a good game. And it's like, that's what I feel like when I'm talking about art reviewers, where people are not necessarily giving it proper thought. They're just giving it a score, or they're rating it against other things in some way. And that is what really drives me crazy about art critics, where they don't think about it in a way that's valuable for consumption for other people, if that makes sense.
Sure.
They're just being like, I thought this was dumb, 5 out of 10. And it's just like, no, that's not anything. That's not art. That's not anything.
And there's a reason that I read certain reviews, even game reviews. Like, for instance, I really like Rock Paper Shotgun because, as far as I know, they don't have a rating system. Exactly. And basically, you know, it's a long form article about, hey, I played this game, and here's kind of, you know, it made me feel this way, and I really kind of liked it, but here's the thing about it I didn't really like. And, like, it's more conversational, where it's like, oh, I really get a sense of what's good and bad about this game and why I might want to play it and why it might be important and why I might not want to play it. You know, like, you know, they do a really nice job. And that's what I felt like Ebert did as well. And maybe that's just the sign of a good critic.
Yes. So I was wrong in my initial judgment. There are definitely good critics out there for art, but I feel that they're very few and far between. And there are a lot of very bad critics out there that's just like creating content for people to consume, but not necessarily enrich their lives, or they don't care about the content they're talking about necessarily in the same way. Yeah. Where it's just like, well, we need to talk about something, so let's just talk about this. I don't know.
No, that's
maybe
good.
I'm just talking on my ass.
And that's all right. I was gonna ask you. I was gonna ask you if critique is mashup, is movie criticism music?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, absolutely. And that's what I'm saying. Like, you were inspired to check out Resident Evil because of his review on it. And like, his review is basically taking his writing style and his personality and his thoughts, and he's mashing it up with that movie. And maybe that's a bit of an abstract concept, where it's just like, you know, talking about something is mashing up the ideas that you have and the ideas that the content has. But I don't know. I guess that could be considered a way of describing mashups, where you're you're integrating your personality into other people's works, and that might be a way of talking about mashups.
Well, and that's something, you know, and getting back to mashups, that's something. One of the things I think about mashups, and I also think about sampling, like Fatboy Slim style sampling, is that, you know, it's postmodernism. And I'm sure that's a dirty word, right? But it's the idea of taking something, that already exists and recontextualizing it and making it into another thing that says something that the original artist didn't intend. And here's a great example, getting back to Fatboy Slim, right, is Praise You has a sample in it from the Disco Disney album off of Small World, and Small World was done, and it's got kind of a funk guitar thing, and he literally just lifted a couple of funk guitar notes, and it's in there. And once you know what it is and know it's there, like, you hear it in the song in Praise You, and you're like, oh my god, that's so funny that it came from, you know. And like, all I can think about now when I hear Praise You, and this is something I heard, I found out like 6 months ago, like, you know, and all I can hear now is those notes and going like, did he like seriously listen to like the entire Disco Disney album that I had as a kid? And like he was like going through it, going like, I bet I could lift a couple of interesting bits off of this, you know, like and that's like that to me is like so cool. Like holy crap, that he lifted like these two little things that are like holy crap, you know, and once you know what they are, you're like, oh my god.
And I think that part of that is like the personal challenge in doing it. And like when I do the 2-hour track challenge, sometimes I'm making something and I do something. I'm like, oh, that was really dumb. I'm going to keep that in just to see if I can.
Yeah.
And I think that that's part of the fun in making things where, you know, you do something stupid and you're like, there's no reason this should exist in what I'm making, but I want to keep it in anyway because it's fun and it's funny and it's stupid.
Yeah.
And I think that people take art too seriously sometimes. And it's just like, even if you can't tell that there was all this stupid stuff that happened in the process of making something, and I think it's still valuable to have that in there because it imbues personality into that art. And I don't think art is serious. I think that you should make dumb art as often as possible because it's more fun. And the more dumb art we have in the world, the better. Because you had fun doing it. You had fun doing it, and the process is the important part.
Yeah, totally.
Because when and I've said this before, when the art is done and when you're done with it, it's not yours anymore. It's whoever is listening to it, because they're putting their own personal experiences into that art when they listen to it. And yeah.
Oh, that's one of the funniest things is if you ever want to do an interesting exercise about how much you bring to artwork that you, or to, especially to music, but I mean really to anything, is read lyrics. Go read the lyrics to Possum Kingdom from the Toadies, right? And it's like the story of that is pretty clearly somebody trying to talk someone into, like, you know, either killing themselves or getting themselves into a situation where they can be, you know, like killed. And yet none of that is stated in the song at all. Like none of that is stated. It's all implication, and it's all left up to you to sort out what's going on. And I mean, like, if you just start reading lyrics and looking for the things that you think the lyrics are saying, they're not, you know, those things are a lot of times not there or not directly there. And it's all interpretation. It's all up to what what you're hearing versus what they're saying. Yeah. It's all contextual, and it's all art's pretty cool. I don't know. That's all I have to say about it. I just like, I'm not really good at listening to lyrics. Like for some reason they just flow through my head. Well,
but,
but I mean, I'm just saying, like, you know,
just
even
in general,
if you're just in general, like if you listen to a song and you think the story is one thing, go read the lyrics, because it's pretty likely that, you know, when you actually read the lyrics, it's like, oh wait, that could very easily be something else. Yeah, exactly. You know, it's pretty cool.
Yep, I guess that's the point we're ending on. Art's pretty cool. I think that's most of the time where we end on these in this podcast, but I think that's all right. I think it's fun to look at different facets of how things are experienced.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. And I mean, that's one of the things, that's one of the reasons we can do this podcast every week, is because there's always a different perspective or something interesting to talk about in terms of art. And even like, you know, like what Tim does, streaming is, you know, it's an art form. I mean, it's content production, and that makes it sound very, you know, mechanical, but it's not. I mean, it's something that you have to pour like blood, sweat, and tears into to make happen. And it's really that's super cool, MIntrovrt. I'm sorry, I just got interrupted by MIntrovrt in the chat, who says that they found a guy that puts his music on GitHub. Links, or it didn't happen. SoundCloud. Links, or it didn't happen. Meaning that'd be great if you'd put a link in the chat. So, but that's what I mean. Like, a lot of these things, a lot of stuff that you see, even the simplest YouTube video or the person streaming PUBG is probably putting more artwork and more like kind of time and effort into it than you will ever realize they did. It's easy. It's one of those stupid things like chess, right? It's easy to learn and hard to master. Like there's a lot of work you end up putting into these things that you don't even necessarily get back, and people don't even necessarily appreciate.
Yeah, and that was actually briefly kind of something else that I touched on when I was doing my stream before we started the podcast, where it's just like, if you're starting to do creative things for the sole purpose of making money, you're probably not going to do very well, both from an artistic perspective and just in general.
Yeah.
Like, and there are people who know how to game the system and like mechanically make their art more like, I don't know, more visible than others. But I don't think that if you're getting into the artistic realm specifically to make money, I feel like you're doing it wrong. Just like, because it requires some emotion to get put into it for things to get out, like for things to come out at the other end.
Yeah, and
like,
I mean,
I would want to experience.
And I would think that the best streamers, for instance, are people who really honestly enjoy like the interaction that they get from streaming. Versus someone who's just streaming to try to like make money. I have a feeling that, that a number of streamers really crave the chat room and the actual interaction with people that they get. Because, there's a lot more humanity there in streaming than I think people realize.
Yeah, there is.
So, cool. Well, I think on that topic, on that bombshell there, we're going to end it today. We have reached our social interaction quota for the week. Ben Burns, where can people find you on the interwebs?
You can find me online at Twitch, Twitter, Patreon, and YouTube at Ben_Burns. I do primarily music stuff, but I also do other creative things as well, so check out those places.
Very, very cool. I'm at ZaxaCMK on Twitter, twitch.tv/ZaxaCMK, youtube.com/EricKleinCreate. The show is available on Stitcher, Google Play, iTunes, and wherever fine podcasts are sold. Our website is mandatorysocial.com. You can get all the episodes there or on YouTube. Our streaming overlay was created by Maris MIntrovrt Alicke. Said hi to Maris in the chat. The theme song is Protofunk by Kevin Macleod. You can find that at incompetech.com. The background music is by Ben Burns at abstractionmusic.com. Thank you very much for watching and hanging out with us, and we'll see you next week.
Yep. Bye.
Nice.
Can't see.